Throughout the Ukrainian-Russian conflict of 2022 and the greater history of modern Ukraine, few countries have proven to be as supportive and reliable as the Republic of Poland. The Poles hold a hard and turbulent history with Russia which can be aptly characterized as skeptical and hostile. Historically, Poland has been thrice partitioned between Russia and the Germanic states of Prussia and Austria, wiping it off the map for roughly a century, only briefly returning under Napoleon through the short-lived Duchy of Warsaw before once again being re-annexed by Russia, where it would remain until World War I, when the Central Powers would liberate it from Russian rule, though primarily for the purpose of weakening Russia. Of course, the Central Powers were defeated, but Poland refused to cease existing and fought bitterly to ensure its survival. And so it would, seizing back lands lost to the Russian, German, and Austrian empires and fending off a Soviet reconquest. The Soviets, however, would strike back in 1939, striking a deal with Germany to mutually invade Poland and reclaim lost land. Germany reducing Poland to a landlocked rump state and triggering the Second World War. Poland would rebound following Germany's defeat, however now found themselves under Soviet sway, with their borders once again redrawn. Only with the collapse of the Soviet Union was Poland finally free. But after some 2 centuries of domination, knowing only a few decades of actual independence, Poland is not eager to fall under the yoke of a greater power anytime soon. In fact, it stands tremendously motivated to strengthen itself and establish its own sphere of influence by fostering positive relations with its neighbors. The Poles have since joined NATO and the European Union, but treat both as strategic tools for bolstering its own military and economic might respectively, and stands weary of German and French efforts to further federate and centralize the Union into something more than an economic bloc. Likewise, the Poles have sought to wean themselves and Europe as a whole off of dependence upon Russian resources, as they recognize the Russians as maintaining an aggressive and expansionist mentality. It should thus come as no surprise that given this history and perception of Russia that Poland was the first nation to recognize Ukrainian independence, was and has remained one of the most vocal advocates for Ukraine to join the European Union and NATO, has established close trade relations with the Ukraine, and promoted cooperation forums between it and other nations. Upon Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Poland took a firm stance of opposition, demanding immediate support for Ukraine from the international community and that action be taken against Russia, firstly economic and political, but that a military response not ruled out if all else fails. Even prior to Russia's invasion, Poland sought an increase of permanent military forces within its border as a response to Russia's annexation of Crimea, refusing to allow Russia to grow closer and stronger through the subjugation of a potential ally and buffer state, and refusing to be itself subjugated once again. Given these circumstances, it seems clear that Poland has great reason to want to aid Ukraine, to the point some have considered the possibility of Poland alone intervening militarily without the rest of NATO. This show of leadership has brought additional attention to this state often relegated to niche geopolitical discussions, and with power dynamics shifting in Eastern and Central Europe, Poland may be primed to assume a more dominant role in the years to come. Now before we go any further, let's take a moment to thank today's sponsor, NordVPN. I'm sure you've probably heard of these guys before, but just in case you haven't, allow me to introduce you to one of the best VPN services on the market. Virtual Private Networks, or VPNs for short, provide you an extra layer of protection on the internet by funneling your data through a private and encrypted channel, and that's not even mentioning the increased speed you'll enjoy along a private network. NordVPN happens to be the fastest VPN currently available, and hosts literal thousands of servers across dozens of countries. Of course, NordVPN doesn't just offer practicality in the field of security, anonymity, and internet speed. There's also what you might call a more recreational side to the service in that you can use their international network of servers to bypass geo-restrictions for things like games and streaming services, allowing you to enjoy content that might otherwise be exclusive to only a certain part of the world. Now you can try NordVPN risk-free with a whole 30-day money-back guarantee. Link will be in the description. Once again, that's 30 days of NordVPN for you to test out and see if it's right for you. Now, back to the video. Having escaped the clutches of the Soviet Union and being courted by the European Union, Poland could see the writing on the wall. This was a union dominated by France and Germany, with long-term goals of binding its member states closer together. The Poles have no intention of being essentially annexed into a new German-led state, even if such a thing is far on the horizon and an oversimplification. But realistically, where else is there to turn to? In the east stood Russia, whose Soviet government had held them captive for decades. Really, Poland trusts neither Russia nor the West as long-term allies, at least not ones it can fully depend upon to share its same interests. Poland feels that it must come into its own and build a powerful Central European bloc that stands strong against the encroaching influences of the West and East. The plan once proposed in the aftermath of World War I to create a union which encompassed states between the Adriatic, Black, and Baltic Seas with Poland at its heart has become a revived template for this new alternative. The Czechs, Slovaks, Romanians, Baltics, and Ukrainians would have all broken free from Soviet domination around the same time as Poland, with Yugoslavia collapsing soon after, and even in present many of them stand skeptical of both the European Union and Russia. In 2015, Poland officially established the Three Seas Initiative, a looser take on its original post-Great War Intermarium Plan, which seeks to deepen cooperation and integration between Eastern EU members. Though the initiative is still in its infancy, this demonstrates a clear effort by Poland to assert a distinct place for itself and the Eastern member states within the EU. Poland knows it cannot compete economically with France or Germany, but can help facilitate the fulfillment of East European agendas that often fall to the wayside of Western-dominated policies. It is an opportunity for Poland to demonstrate its ability to lead to these states, and in the long term, sway them into its own sphere of influence. I've already gone over in my video on if a federated Europe is inevitable how the values, economies, and interests of these eastern states differ from those of the West. But in short, you're looking at states which are on average more conservative than their Western counterparts, less in favor of federation, more interested in the development of local economics, and of course, more personally invested in where they stand in relation to Russia. With the invasion of Ukraine, eastern states such as Finland, Moldova, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are growing increasingly concerned that they may be Russia's next target. However, the lackluster response from the West despite widespread calls for intervention have left many questioning the strength of Western resolve. Of course, I say lackluster in the sense that a good deal of people in the East seem to have expected direct military action. However, the economic and political response delivered has been unquestionably excessive and counterproductive to the Western powers, as Russia has not relented in its offensive and has retaliated economically, bringing great strain to Western economies. If the Russian invasion of Ukraine proves successful, the financial toll this has taken on the West may drive them to retreat from Eastern European politics. Truly, it would be incredibly demoralizing for America's allies, and may lead many more to question if even NATO remains an effective deterrent against Russia's aggressions. It will be in the aftermath of the conflict that Poland steps up and pursues with various other eastern states a more local and dependable mutual defense solution, which may initially only be an additional layer of defense on top of the NATO alliance, but which would be treated as an eventual replacement if the US proves incapable or unwilling to defend its allies. Whether or not Ukraine survives the conflict, such an alliance would likely come together, with the fall of Ukraine only expediting its creation. If the Ukrainian rump state survives and does not become a puppet of Russia, the latter of which seems unlikely given Western Ukrainian disdain for Russia, it could also be expected to become a part of this new alliance. On a long enough timeline, Poland could be expected to consolidate some of these states into a closer union oriented around itself, but would likely fall short of creating a federation the likes of that which the European Union has the potential to become. The deeper sense of nationalism which exists within these states, as well as the wider cultural differences, would almost certainly keep Hungary, Romania, and Austria out of an intermarium state. Unlike Western Europe, there isn't a long-standing desire for pan-European unity in the East, but rather a desire for independence from a shared geopolitical threat which demands cooperation under the leadership of a state willing to take a stand against it. Poland, like Russia and some other Central European powers, is a state which still embraces the ideal of a strong central leader to guide the country down a long-term path to ultimately achieve a better standing in the world. Because of this, the Poles have been at times labeled as undemocratic, but given the circumstances Poland finds itself surrounded by, it most certainly cannot afford to compromise on consistent and powerful leadership, especially as the stepping stones for the emerging Polish sphere have already been laid, and the actions of Russia have demonstrated an increasing urgency for its emergence. That being said, while Poland does appear as a clear leader given its position as the largest economy in the region by far, and its ranking as the 24th most powerful military force in the world, standing only behind Ukraine and Canada, while surpassing the next largest power in the region, Romania, in nearly every respect but resource production, Poland still isn't a perfect leader who can, in the long term, appeal to the cultures and long-term interests of these very proud and nationalist states. Poland is a Catholic and Slavic nation, which puts it at odds with Austria and Hungary, which are Catholic but not Slavic, Ukraine and Bulgaria, which are Slavic but not Catholic, and Poland's potential next largest partner of Romania, which is neither Slavic nor Catholic. Only Lithuania and Slovakia could stand reasonably comfortable under Polish hegemony, as well as other small or vulnerable states in the immediate vicinity. So, is the Intermarium inevitable? Not exactly. I would dare say that given the outdated nature of NATO and waning American prominence on the world stage, a replacement Intermarium alliance does appear inevitable. However, an Intermarium federation on the same scale appears fairly unlikely, though not utterly impossible. The US of Z thanks you for watching. Support your legion by liking the video, or join our ranks by subscribing for more. Mr. Z out.